All right, I want to welcome on my next guest. We've got recurring guests. We've got Fox Sports, NFL, and NCAA football rules analyst Dean Blandino. Dean, how's everything going for you?
Pretty good. How are you?
I'm doing well. Washington somehow made the playoffs. I don't know if they deserved it, at least last Sunday. I don't know. What were your thoughts on that? That was one of the weirdest things I've ever seen.
Yeah, obviously the way it played out was interesting. I think a lot of people have a lot of different theories. I'm not in the Philadelphia organization. I don't know all the thinking that went into that. I do know that Coach Peterson did say that he wanted to get Sudfeld in the game. And look, here's the deal. This is a situation where Philadelphia didn't have anything to play for in terms of, the playoffs. So they've got to do what's best for their organization. And obviously Washington's going to, try to win the game. And I know Giants fans didn't like it, but ultimately, hey, look, you can't leave it in another team's hands. At 6-10, that's I'm not sure there are many people that feel too sorry. You got to go out and win the games that you control what you can control.
Yeah. And then speaking of the Giants, what were your thoughts on that kind of? I don't know if it was controversial, but that final ruling on Wayne Gallman when they did rule it in the Giants' favor.
Yeah, it was interesting because initially it looked like the ball was loose, and then the official signaled that the Cowboys had it. But when you watch the replays, Gallman did recover it. There was a really good shot that came up on the broadcast where you see Gallman with control of the football. He's laying there on the ground. So at that point, and the umpire saw that, ruled that the Giants had recovered it. So everything after that is basically a moot point. And so I thought that was the correct call.
Regardless, it doesn't really matter who would have gotten it because neither of those teams would have eventually made it to the playoffs. So yeah. I wonder, it's wild to think about in hindsight. And then, so one of the things I want to ask you about is the news came out today that Browns head coach Kevin Stefanski and a couple of their coaches were unable to be there on Sunday. Yeah. Is this something you think the NFL is planned for, or was there any hesitation about maybe pushing the game back?
I think everything has been in play. What we've seen this year with COVID, and there's been contingencies upon contingencies. So I'm sure the NFL has looked at this, and obviously we've seen teams, the Lions, other teams, the Broncos have to go play games shorthanded. And it is what it is at this point. Mike Prefer, who's a great coach, who's the special teams coordinator, is gonna be the acting head coach, and I'm sure Kevin will have input during the week, and it is what it is at this point. We just have to. This is a new reality for everybody, and I don't imagine the league, unless Cleveland has a complete outbreak where they can't field a team. I can't imagine the league, changing the time or day of the game.
Interesting. And then how, with all the COVID protocols this year, when do you think it kind of, because I know at the beginning, a lot of the players weren't wearing masks and they had the updated protocols, and a lot of coaches, I know Gruden was having the mask over here, a lot of fines. When do you think it kind of kicked in that all right, this is the real deal and everybody sort of bought in?
I think, probably after the first couple of weeks, and I know clubs were fined and coaches were fined significant amounts of money. And I think everybody realized that this was serious. And especially when you leave your team, we looked at, there were players that weren't, were meeting and didn't have masks on, and then had to sit, and that hurt their team's chances to win that game. So I think everybody realized how important this really is, and social distancing and masking up and everything else. And it's a tremendous, it's actually a phenomenal accomplishment. Yeah. Everybody involved with the NFL, on the league side, on the club side, to get 256 games in without a cancellation. Yeah. What an unbelievable accomplishment. And obviously we still got the playoffs to go, and we'll see what happens. But I think it just took a coordinated effort by so many people to make this happen.
Before the season, did you think there was a chance they'd get to this point, or what were your thoughts?
I was cautiously optimistic, but you just didn't know. There was so much out there about the virus and everything else. You had no idea. And we still don't know. There's still a lot of unknowns. You see cases spiking in a lot of places around the country. And obviously the vaccine, we've got vaccines out there, and hopefully that distribution can go well and we can get people vaccinated. And hopefully, who knows when, but in a couple of months or whatever it may be, we can get back to some kind of normal, or, maybe it's just a new reality for all of us.
Is the NFL even thinking about next season yet, or are they just finishing up this one now?
No, there's always planning. Look, the NFL, in my time at the NFL, I always learned that you're always thinking ahead. You have you have to start planning. Just think about the Super Bowl, or you think about the combine, the draft, all of these things. It's not like you can show up 2 weeks before and pull this off. So they are absolutely thinking about, next year and beyond, especially with these big events.
Yeah.
Again, I don't know what the future holds, but I know the league is certainly preparing for every possible, possible contingency to try to make sure that, 2021 and beyond goes really well.
Yeah. How would the league plan for if one of the top officiating crews, like the day before the game, all test positive?
Yeah, so the league is prepared for that. So at every playoff game, there's 5 alternate officials. So in addition to the 7 that are assigned to work the game, there's going to be 5 alternate officials that can step in if there's a problem. And if worst case scenario, you have, you have 7 officials that are tested positive that can't work, you would have officials within driving distance on call that can get ready to go and work that game. So I imagine with that amount of extra bodies, we should, cross fingers, we should be able to get through any type of an outbreak. But again, it's uncharted territory, and that's something the league is just continuing to work through.
Let's go. One last COVID related question, because with the news of Stefanski today, it came to my mind. If one of the starting quarterbacks in a conference championship or even the Super Bowl tested positive, would they still go on with the game, or would they seriously think about moving it back?
I don't know, I don't know the answer. There's so many variables, when did they test positive, all of those things. Again, I just feel like with all of the testing and all of the protocols in place, if the players adhere to those like they have been for the most part, hopefully we won't have to deal with that. Again, there's so many variables. It's tough to say what would happen if that took place.
I saw a statistic. I'm not sure how legit this was. I don't know if NFLpenalties.com sounds legit. I feel like it could be legit. Apparently, over the past 11 years, referees enforced 300 more offensive penalties than defensive per year, except this year it's flipped. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, there was definitely a change. And I think overall penalties were down. And there's a lot of reasons for that. The offseason was just different this year. There was not, the in-person instruction. Officials didn't have a chance to go and work OTAs or training camps or even the preseason. So I think there was some kind of just hesitancy to maybe just pull it back a little bit and not call as many fouls. Offensive holding was way down this year, and that's probably the biggest reason why that balance has shifted a little bit. I don't know if it's just a one-off, if it's an outlier, 1 year. The competition committee will look at this in the offseason. I would hope that they would take a good look at offensive holding and what the standard is and what techniques are a foul and what techniques are legal, and give the officiating department and the officials good direction going into 2021. I wouldn't anticipate any changes during the postseason. It is what it is. And you always want to have the same standard throughout for consistency purposes. But I think offensive holding was probably the biggest reason, and offensive pass interference was way down this year as well, as to why those, that offensive and defensive balance kind of shifted somewhat this year.
Are there any teams that are clamoring now like we should have kept the ability to challenge pass interference, or are most teams just fine with how it is now?
I think most teams, the way it played out in 2019, I think most teams felt it just didn't work. The way it was implemented was not what was intended. And I haven't heard too much from teams complaining about that. I mean, pass interference continues to be a big call in the game, especially defensive pass interference, where it could be a 30 or 40-yard penalty. And obviously you want to get those right. I don't think coaches are that upset about not being able to challenge just because of the way it played out in 2019. I don't think they were satisfied with that. And I think they're comfortable with where we are now.
Do you think eventually they'll change the defensive pass interference rule to when they tack on what is sometimes like a 50-yard gain? Do you think sometimes that gets out of hand, or that the teams just have to prepare for that?
Well, yeah, that's been a discussion for as long as I've been a part of the NFL. I mean, they were talking about that in the 90s, potentially going to the college rule, the 15-yard max. And the concern has always been what happens to the deep passing game. The NFL, this is the best of the best. And the college rule, remember, college rule will apply to Ohio State, Alabama, Clemson, but it also applies to Division III schools. And there's a pretty big difference between those athletes. And then when you get to the NFL, you have the best of the best. So if an NFL cornerback is beat, are they just going to grab, take their chances, be more aggressive in the deep passing game? And that would hamper the offense's ability to throw the ball deep. So that's always been the concern. You want to get those calls right, especially when they're that significant. I don't anticipate any change, at least in the near term. Those conversations really haven't gone anywhere when they've occurred in the past.
Is there anything that's kind of like first order of business in the offseason in terms of maybe rule tweaking or changes that you've maybe heard about?
I just think a review of the offensive holding standard. I think that's going to happen. I think roughing the passer is another one that I think they'll look at. I don't think there was a glaring rule glaring potential change to a rule that has to happen. I don't think that there was anything that jumped out, at least from my perspective. But I think, like the competition committee does every offseason, review all the major fouls. They review player safety issues. Obviously, that's important. And I would imagine that there will be some rules changes that come out of that review. But I don't think there's any glaring, needs right now in terms of rules.
And speaking of roughing the passer, so Saturday night, we've got the Washington football team and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Are officials going to be ready to call roughing the passer quicker, knowing you've got Alex Smith with his leg contingencies and Tom Brady's on the other side, and it's Tom Brady, so you can't let him get hurt?
Well, officials do get ready for the game, and they'll go through a scouting report, and they'll look at video. And one of the things, if they're looking at that, obviously with Brady and Alex Smith, you have two pocket passers. You don't have guys that are going to leave the pocket as much, like a Kyler Murray or a Josh Allen. So I think that'll be part of the scouting report that these quarterbacks are going to be more in the pocket. We're not going to have to deal with outside the pocket as much, and protections change inside the pocket versus outside the pocket. So they'll go through that. But as to who the quarterback is, that's not a factor in their decision making or their preparation. It's just the characteristics of that quarterback. What they like to do is going to be a part of that preparation.
What were your thoughts on the targeting call in the Clemson-Ohio State game?
I thought it was a good call. A lot of people were upset about that, and I think what gets lost sometimes is it's a foul if you lower your head and initiate forcible contact with the crown of the helmet, and that part of the targeting rule is not necessarily designed to protect the player getting hit. It's to protect the player who's doing the hitting. And when you watch that play, I mean, regardless of what Justin Fields was doing, Stefanski can't hit with his head like that. And I likened it to a play from 2017, Ryan Shazier on Monday Night Football. If you watch those two clips, they're very similar in terms of body posture. And Ryan Shazier, that ended his career, and he had to learn to walk again. And that's the worst case scenario for a hit like that. And that's what you hope that players see, that, especially Stefanski, who had one in the championship game the year before where he lowered his head. And you hope that players see that and learn that type of technique is dangerous. And it's unfortunate that you have a guy that's going to get disqualified from the game, but that is the greatest deterrent to not, performing that technique that can be dangerous.
Yeah. And then, so for the playoffs this year, what are your predictions? What's your biggest predicted upset this year?
Biggest predicted upset. I'm kind of one game I'm looking forward to, which I think it would be an upset, obviously. If the team, I like that first game on Saturday, the Colts and the Bills. I think, both teams like to run the ball. Both teams play good defense. I think that could be a fun game to watch with Phillip Rivers and Josh Allen. I think the Colts have a shot in that game. Who knows? It's tough to predict these things. It's hard to say, the way Kansas City's been playing that a team is going to go to Kansas City and beat them. But as we've learned in the NFL in the past, anything can happen. Anybody can win once they get into the playoffs. So I'm excited to see, and we get an extra game this year, week 1. So I'm excited to watch, 6 games instead of 4.
Are you calling into the Nickelodeon game this year? Is that on Fox?
It's not.
Oh.
No, I would love to, but that's not part of our broadcast. We've got the Rams and Seahawks on Saturday, and then we'll see what happens in the divisional round, how it plays out.
I'm very interested in that Nickelodeon game. And then, so one last question for you. So it's rumored that Drew Brees is thinking about retiring this year. Saints have really kind of gotten screwed the last 3 years in different ways. This year, if it's coming down to a game deciding call, are they going to be a little less hesitant to blow the whistle, knowing this could jeopardize Drew Brees winning a second Super Bowl?
Officials have to be like defensive backs. They have to have a short memory. They can't be thinking about something that happened even earlier in the game. It might even be one play earlier. They have to be focused on what's ahead. So I don't think the officials are going to be worrying about what happened to the Saints in the past. And they're going to go in and just do the best they can and call what they see in front of them.
Yeah, and then actually one last question. Can you talk about Her Turf and how you got involved with it and how people can check it out?
Yeah, Her Turf was a documentary. Chantel Hansen, who's the filmmaker, we had a mutual friend reach out and connected us, and I learned about the project. She had spent, a couple of years with a group of female football officials and kind of watching them and their journey and on the field and off the field. And we kind of hit it off, and she asked if I would like to be involved, and I jumped at the chance, and it was just an amazing experience. Her Turf was it's a short documentary. It follows 3 female football officials. We had it in a bunch of film festivals. It won a bunch of awards. And we're going to make it available on online pretty soon here. So you can check out my Twitter page and at Dean Blandino, and we'll put it out pretty soon here.
Awesome. Well, that's really all the questions I really have for you. I'm excited for the playoffs this year. I'm hoping there's no cancellations. This is the last COVID-related coach that has to stand out. Hopefully no players, and we can just go smooth sailing into February. But I do appreciate you taking the time.
Couldn't agree more.